So does this work? Yes, it works.
And mine works too?
Yes,
Okay.
everybody's works. Okay. So we're Mike Shatskin and Lorraine Shanley, and we'll let you guess which is which. And we're going to talk about yesterday's Publishers Launch Conference, Children's Publishing Goes Digital. And maybe somebody will even want to know about it.
So one of the differences in yesterday's conference to other children's conferences that have taken place was that the emphasis was really on the children's ecosystem rather than on children's books and how they're being turned into ebooks. We really wanted to look at what children and parents are doing now and how that's evolving in the reading space as opposed to what children's publishers are doing and where they're going to be going in the reading space, in the reading digital space. Having said that, one of the things that we first looked at was where paper books are, print books are, and where ebooks are going. And we had a very interesting study that was commissioned essentially for us by Bowker, the U.S. tracking and data tracking system. And we looked at both the U.S. and the U.K. to see what the numbers were, and interestingly, in the ebook space, children's and young adults are lagging behind adults. And Mike, you want to explain why it is that?
Well, people can only speculate about why it is. And for one thing, we know that illustrated material has not moved to ebooks as robustly and seamlessly as narrative text has. And so much of children's publishing requires their illustrated presentation, so that would be part of it. What we found interesting in the survey was that young people don't believe that ebooks are social. They find print books more social because they're able to lend their books and pass them around, and they're not able to do that with ebooks. Now, whether that's really true or whether that's speculation is a little hard to tell, but you're right. It was a kind of counterintuitive piece of information. We're all expecting that the younger the audience, the more digital it'll be, and that's not what the numbers seem to say.
Not at the moment, and I think part of that is because ebooks are in their infancy because the iPad is in its infancy. This is 18 months old and too expensive for most parents to want their children to use. So that's going to be a very quickly evolving market. Having said that, the app world is quickly gaining on the ebook world and even on the print world. And a lot of the newer players who are moving into the children's area are moving from gaming and other developer related areas into children's and then into children's books. And to me, that's both the exciting momentum that's happening in the children's world, but from a publisher point of view, it's something that they really have to watch very carefully and figure out how can I use this to my advantage and not cede that territory to outsiders, developers.
But I think actually the outsiders have tremendous advantages because as children's reading goes digital, we are going to expect to see products that have components of games, components of animation, components of books. And I've been thinking that you could be a book publisher with all the book publisher skills and have to hire in the gaming skills, or you could be a gamer, a game creator, and have to hire in the book publishing skills. And I sort of think I'd rather be in that position. So I think that the book publishers, today's children's book publishers, may find themselves working for today's game developers as the two merge to become the same product. And I think that's really the big question for children's book publishers today is, can they maintain their position as the creators of the new content for the young market, or will they be throwing their skills in to somebody else's product?
That's complicated by the fact that there are so many gatekeepers in children's publishing, from parents of young children, school teachers of young and middle grade children, friends, relatives, and as you get into the young adult market, of course, you're looking at a lot of peer-to-peer. Particularly in the young adult market, it's extremely difficult to market into that age group unless you have some credibility. And a lot of the credibility comes from being able to know, who the bloggers are, where the reviews are being written, where the books are showing up either in schools or libraries. And those are the kind of things that it will be harder for a third party to navigate, but nothing's impossible. And a lot of these third-party developers have really moved into the market with enormous speed and canniness. And in some cases, they don't have the strictures that the more traditional player has, because they're not looking for something that is educationally driven and curriculum-based. So I would say that ultimately it could be a very healthy mixture if each learns from the other and each informs the other.
I thought one of the things I found interesting in looking at the influencers was that the number one influencer for children's books was mom, and number 3 was dad, and the teachers were in the middle.
Right.
So this is teaching the marketers that you have to sell the children's book to mom, then the teachers, then to dad, and that's how you're going to get to the kids. And anyway, I found that sort of amusing, and
but
I'm wondering.
Also, one of the things that was interesting was that if it's an ebook or an app, it's likelier to be dad. I mean, there was the print digital divide was still there.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, then, in other words, dad's trusted for the technologically.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, it just goes that sexism is still alive and well, apparently.
But one of the things that we talked a lot about yesterday, which we both found very provocative, was, again, from the gaming world, there is it's a given that when you create a game, whatever language you create it in, you embed 4 or 5 other languages into that.
E-figs. Everybody has to learn e-figs. E-figs is English, French, Italian, German, Spanish. The people in the games world know that all games must come with all 5 e-figs languages. Book publishers making apps and ebooks are learning from the games developers that all electronic children's books really have to come with all 5 e-figs languages. And this is an example, I think, of the fact that the game creators are a few steps ahead of the book publishers in understanding how to serve these marketplaces.
And a lot less concerned about cultural differences between Spanish and South American Spanish. Much more willing to just put it out there, and people accommodate to what the language is. And actually, some of the audience members said that as a Spanish-speaking publisher from South America, this was something that they were entirely comfortable with doing, and always read a Spanish language book and were able to adjust very happily to whatever cultural nuances they had to adjust to.
Of course, in defense of book publishers, in relation to the game publishers, the game publishers are not buying their game from an agent who wants to make sales to England, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. So they're developing their own game, and they figured out that they need all the languages, and they put them in. And a book publisher is inhibited by the time-honored practices of our industry.
Right, right.
And this can become a real problem. And it's going to mean that in order for successful electronic products to be developed, parents are going to expect that their child in any country will be able to learn the language of any of these other countries through the electronic products that they'll be buying, and they're going to find that the stuff from the most established publishers is blocked from doing this. So this is a challenge for our industry moving in with the others.
And one of the interesting juxtapositions was to see large licensors dealing with how they deploy their licenses, not by the traditional relationships that they have with each country, but over an individual IP into a multitude of platforms in a global environment. And those were the kinds of things that it was great to have licensors and developers and publishers all sit together and figure out how are we going to go forward in a way that's going to be maximally efficient.
The other thing I found in some ways very refreshing was the candor of a couple of our panelists about the fact that we're spending a lot of money developing these things, but we don't know if we're going to make any money back yet. And that, I think, is really the open question. We know, we've learned in the English language world that straight text narrative books can be presented on screens instead of on paper, and most people will accept them. And the adoption is taking place over time, but people see a Kindle or read a book on a phone or an iPad, and it works for them if it's regular narrative text. But the illustrated world, that's not so clear yet. And in the children's world, it's not so clear yet. And we don't really know what people are going to want.
Actually, we know a little bit more today because we had a very interesting study given by Jennifer Perry of Sesame Workshop. And they did a lot of studies with young children and their parents, and particularly how they work with an iPad. And what they found out, some of it's very self-evident, but it reinforced the importance of ease of use, clear signals, reinforcement. The kids are very digitally adept, and one of the things she said was that, you know, you think that a child can only touch, but in fact you can teach a very young child to swipe. So there are a lot of things that can be taught, but then you have to remind them where they have to turn the page, where the hot spots are on a page, not to put little directions at the bottom of the iPad because kids tend to lean on iPads. There were a lot of incredibly useful, small but enriching comments that she came up with on actually how children and how their parents best work together when they're reading and interacting with an iPad.
And of course, another thing that came out of that presentation, and also out of what we learned from Scholastic about their new platform, is that they're helping the parents and the teachers in many ways understand what the children are doing. So they're sort of creating a dashboard for the parents to understand what the kid is finding useful, what they're having trouble with, and so forth. And this kind of thing, obviously, not possible in print.
And also has incredibly useful implications in the educational market. One interesting thing about the educational market, and I believe it was from Disney, talking about how educational publishers really have not become, are not innovative enough using digital in creative, entertaining ways in the school market, and he felt that that was a real opportunity for consumer publishers to take hold of that market in a way that up to now they have been reluctant to do.
So is there any important part of this that we haven't talked about yet?
There's always more. But no, I think actually one of the things we talked about marketing and,
Yes.
how do you market
Yes.
digitally? And there seemed to be, even amongst the biggest licensors, a belief that ultimately that sale to an individual country would continue, even though they have the capability of releasing an app or an ebook worldwide in multi-languages, but they really need the individual country's expertise in marketing to that population. And part of that is the print component, which they felt was very important, to be able to have print reviews, to be able to have write-ups in local papers, obviously bookstores.
Yeah, that really came through loud and clear, which is that it's very hard to market these electronic products. We know how to market books, so that the electronic products that come from books are easier to market, and that the book component and the publisher's ability to reach the influencers for children's books, which parents and teachers and so forth, was a critical element. We had taken note that Ruckus Media, which is an app developer, a new app developer, had made a deal to create an imprint with Scholastic. And this is really about getting Scholastic's marketing muscle behind the titles that Ruckus is trying to sell electronically.
But they were one of a number of developers who we talked to yesterday, including a very interesting company, Touchy Books, and another company called Spinaria, which is from Brazil, who have relationships already with a lot of the larger publishers, either in a print digital way or creating products for the traditional publishers or licensing from traditional publishers. What we like to see is the partnering that is can go both ways, that one could license to the other and the other could develop for the other. So it was very exciting to see how many different ways and how many different players could be in the sandlot together.
Yeah, I think that, well, right now they need each other in the in the sandbox, because the new content developers really don't have a clue about how to market this stuff. Touchy Books may be an exception because they are marketing their platform. They're marketing the fact that you can get this app on which ebooks will, quote unquote, play, that are illustrated ebooks for children. The book will read itself to you, etc. They're working mostly with public domain material and I guess their own created material, so that they don't have to pay any licensing rights. They're selling incredibly cheap, 99 cents, $1.99, $2.99, so that once you get the app and your kid's playing with the app, the kid wants another book, it's a really trivial expense for the parent. And if that's the direction of children's publishing, it's really hard to see how paper is going to compete. It's going to be very, very difficult when everybody has one of these touchy apps on their iPad or iPhone and can get new content for 99 cents.
And yet, one of the outcomes of this Bowker study was that only a third of children's print books are actually bought for that child. The other 2/3 are hand-me-downs, borrowed,
Presents.
And so it does mean, and we think that there are going to be, there's going to be growth in the children's area, both in print because of gifting, because of hand-me-downs, and yet there's also going to be this ebook and app, burgeoning population. So between everything that's happening, it's going to be a very exciting and quickly growing market.
Yes, and I think that the other thing about it that's very important is that it's an example of the fact that we have many industries in the book business. We call it the book business because it is about books, but it really is many different businesses. And we're going to see that in the digital world, that straight text is going to move at a different speed than illustrated, and juvenile is going to move at a different speed than adult. And these businesses that are really many different businesses will look more like many different businesses when they're not anchored by the physical form of the book.
And I think that wraps it up.
I think it does. Thank you very much.